Hello and welcome to Masquerade Breach, Season 2, Episode 9. I'm Blazewing.
I'm Catherine Cosplays, otherwise known as Krisha.
You're who? We didn't hear that.
Really?
Ah!
I was going to say your phone didn't pick up. That would be Marley. Okay.
And I'm Oceanus Veritas, also known as Cam.
Welcome to, again, Season 2, Episode 9. We are talking about Perfect Creature today. And before we get into that, guys, don't tell the Camarilla. It's our last episode of Season 2.
Oh no.
Yeah. They haven't caught on yet.
Their check still hasn't cleared.
Yeah, so this is our last episode for season 2. After we're done here, we get to sit and start planning for season 3. I also want to kind of next week pull you guys back into chat, pull you guys back into just I guess maybe a wrap up. I don't know, and talk about the entirety of season 2 overall. I might look at adding that in. I know one of you had that as a suggestion. I really like that idea.
I would love to do either a virtual whiteboard or I have it right here next. I go get the giant post-it from the teacher's store and we rate all of the movies from season 2.
We absolutely could. We
Yep.
could also do what was it? The I guess face off or whatever, or competition between maybe like a championships. Which movie comes out on top? We list all the movies that we've watched.
Brackets.
Brackets.
Do the brackets.
We list all of the movies that we've watched so far and find out which one comes up on top. I think that would be absolutely hilarious.
I love that. Let's do it. Hell yeah.
All I keep thinking about. Go ahead.
Marley?
I said yes.
Okay. So,
That being said, I have my unfiltered comments with no context. I didn't get them for the entire movie because I actually kind of got dragged into this movie a little bit. We'll talk about that though, because I have issues with this movie. It's not what you might think. It's not what you might think. We'll get into that in a sec. Season 2, Episode 9, Perfect Creature, Blaze's unfiltered, no context notes. Description suggests commentary on civil rights movement. Oh look, the kid's born. Ah, fuck, it's a vampire church. I should start one, I could be rich. Digging the aesthetic. Wait, vaccine shortage? People believe in science in this universe? Can I move there? Gotta love that shitty CG. Did they never discover penicillin? I'm getting flashbacks to that one episode of Sliders. For those of you that get the reference. Steampunk vibes? More like I live here vibes. This dark grittiness got me hooked. That's a damned fine mustache, dude. Do those handlebars belong to a bike? Has anyone ever told this brother that watching someone sleep like that is creepy as fuck? And he be steaming mad for real. This sums up my no context notes for this episode. So,
Accurate, though.
you what?
Really accurate.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Accurate.
All right, so Perfect Creature, let's talk about it. Overviews. We're going to start with Marley.
Okay, so, it wasn't my kind of movie. And yeah, I watched it. I was there. It wasn't horrible, but it didn't speak to me at all. And like, part of me feels like some of the concepts are just too deep, and others feel like it was too generic at times. And like I just couldn't figure out where I stood with it. Like, I get it, but it was a bit all over the place for my brain, and I have ADHD. And I was like, I'm not sure what page I'm on anymore. So I get it, but I don't get it. That's Marley's take.
Krisha.
Oh boy. Okay. So let's okay. The characters were so beautifully developed. The characters were so rich. They had so much to them. I loved every actor. I loved every character. It was everything, all of the things with the people were so well like developed. The CG sucked. Like it was really bad. It like it was like PlayStation 2 graphics at one point during one of the fight scenes. I think they could have done better with a better editor. Um the story lacked any ebb or flow. It was just stagnant, like one level the entire time. There was no it just like, and then the final scene, they chose the shittiest music because there was no like paramount moment. There was no like victory. There was no like, oh no, like whatever. Like they essentially picked like the elevator music. They literally picked elevator music for this final fucking scene where like the foe is defeated but the world has changed, and like I think I think in the hands of a better editor it could have been a lot better. However, I love the characters so much. I love the characters so much that I can kind of overlook the editing.
Ocean.
So this movie was definitely not for its graphics. Definitely not for the theme, except for one thing. The story was definitely a 006 put into vampire absolute. It had a lot of the times, and it did briefly touch base on a couple of the things that I think Blaze will be talking about.
Give me
won't
one quick
run over
sec.
it. Uh huh.
I'm gonna go turn your volume up a little bit.
Am I quiet? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, sorry. You're better
All
now.
right.
Go ahead.
All right. So what I was saying is there's some things about it that definitely is not the eye catching. The music sucked. Yes, we agree. The CG, granted, even for its time, it could have been better. We understand this, but remember that the PlayStation 2, I believe, came out near 2007, 2008, I believe. I don't remember exactly. So it was right with for the time, I guess. Um, but I love this story, and I love the intellectual games that the characters ended up doing with one another. The brother, the cat and mouse, the I've got something you want when you've had something I've wanted all this time. The dynamics between the characters is what really drew me in. And this movie, while granted is not spiffy or spectacular, and it definitely doesn't have werewolves. Sorry, Marley. it does have a point to it, and I think that's what it was trying to refer to. Not only was it about um, kind of what happens if it does thwart the bad guy, for the bad guy wanted the world to turn. It would have turned the opposite way of what he wanted, but it would have been for the worst. In fact, they even place it to an overarching shadow government that was going to take them out, type thing, that kind of thing. It had some very clandestine thoughts. It definitely had the idea that you can't just lump one with the whole bunch. It put in for prejudice, was an absolute key mark and cornerstone of this movie in the idea of how to combat it. And I think that was one of the things that this movie really kind of illustrated with it. I loved I loved the actors. Um, I specifically loved the main character because I the first time I ever saw that actor was in James Bond 007 Goldeneye, and I loved it. Anyways, that's my take.
There is one thing that I agree with Krishan. The storyline was, I don't want to say flat, but there was no roller coaster. It didn't keep, the storyline itself was like driving from point A to point B on a straight road. But the aesthetics, except for the CG, the aesthetics, oh my god. You guys know me. I've mentioned this more than once while we've been talking about these things. If you have good costume and you have a good set, you're probably going to draw me in. I am an aesthetics-based person. What got me about this movie, and Ocean, you'd actually commented on this, which is why I'm bringing this up. This movie was quiet. And you'd mentioned it's not just the version that I have, it's every version that you've seen or that you've been able to find.
Ocean, you're blurry.
It's every version that you were able to find, right? Yeah. Which tells me that it was a production thing. I had issues with this movie because we sat down to watch it on Wednesday. Not only was this movie quiet, but my brain decided, hey, this is a great night just not to filter out anything at all whatsoever, and you're going to hear every little thing. I could hear Whisper pacing in the bedroom while trying to watch this movie, and the bedroom's on the other side of the apartment. Like, my brain wasn't blocking other noises out, like it somewhat does most of the time. So I had to step out half an hour after the movie started because I just couldn't focus on it. I was having a bad brain night. Went back to watch it today, actually, just before we started here. Krisha popped in for a bit and watched some of it with me. And it pulled me in. Specifically because of the aesthetics, because of the steampunk. I love steampunk. Like, the aesthetics of steampunk. The architecture of steampunk. The invention of steampunk. We saw horse and carriage mingled with cars. We saw horse and carriage mingled with cars while people are talking on a television. Meanwhile, you've got this Victorian era style city. They got the vibe of this city beautifully. Like, they nailed it for Victorian era, for like steampunk. Modern mixed with Victorian era, all of that. They weren't scared to delve into the dark and the gritty. The overtones of dark and grit got me as well. And they weren't afraid to delve into the bloodier scenes. Like, that in itself will also get me. I got pulled into this movie not because of the storyline, but because of the energy that they created with this movie. It's not on my top list of movies, but this is definitely a shelf-worth movie. This is something that may be added to my list of movies to pick up at some point. I mean, I say that about all movies, because all the movies we've talked about, because, I mean, they all have vampires, but this will be, like, on display, I think. So, let's talk about favored scenes. favorite and hated scenes. We're going to start with, our most hated scenes. Let's go with Marley.
Okay, so I understand what was going on with the whole, blood being tainted thing. Um, but that part where the lady had that thing in her arm, this the little spout, I couldn't. Yeah, thank you, thank you. I I don't mind being a juice box, honestly, but I do not want a spout coming out of my arm. That was not okay.
Brings a whole new meaning to the words fresh from the tap.
I was like, no, we're not, we're not doing that. No. I found out I had an ick that moment and I didn't know I had. And that was it. Marley has something she didn't like. What I did like was the way that there was this big separation between human cops and the vampies. And as the movie went on, they became more and more and more and more and more aligned. And once they were fully aligned, it was like they should have been working together all along. Like they completed each other in the way they worked together. And I really love that. Absolutely. Because, like, seriously, in the beginning, they're like, get off my turf, bro. And then by the end, they're like, I love you. Like, it's a thing. Like, but it's funny because they do complete each other. Like, the way that they interact, the way that they think, they realize that they're not as different as they've all been told. And I really appreciate that perspective of it. And of course, the end scene with the baby, I was like, it's really cute and all, but I've been bitten by a baby that didn't have teeth. I'm just worried, like personally worried. Babies do bite, and those bite a lot harder. So that was kind of where my brain went was, oh, now it's temperamental and has teeth. That's great.
Krisha.
Oh, the problem is I don't have a most hated scene. I really don't. If I was gonna say anything, it would be the big fight scene at the end. That wasn't a fight scene. That was he shoved him, he shoved back, and then the villain died. I would have to say I would want this. I would watch this if they remade it into like a 10 episode Netflix series because this needed more time. We should have watched the brother go more insane, I feel like. We should have watched them actually have a brother bond. What? Like literally, like the first time we see them interact is when the blonde brother is basically in a fence in a cell and is like, "Oh yeah, I love the policewoman blood. It was delicious." It's like you can't have the policewoman, and it was like, "Are you gonna like keep her?" And I was like, "What does that mean?" Like that's obviously like the brothers organization. How does that work? Like like what? Like I wish it had more time to really dive into everything. I feel like if they had more time for more setup, it would have been spectacular. I really do, and I really believe that. And like it needed a lot more time. Um, but most hated scene, I think it was anything to have to do with the blonde brother, because they did not give him enough material and they did not give him enough time. The only thing you really see in him is that he slowly gets sicker and sicker and sicker as the movie goes on. but he kind of comes out of the gate like, I'm insane and I'm gonna eat people, blah 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 blah. And then Silas for like a minute is like, he made these really good antibiotics and now he's nuts. And that's all we get. So mo that's my spiel basically boils down to, I wish there was more time. There isn't a least hated scene.
Ocean.
So yeah, I think in a lot of ways this movie does fall on the polished side. It does not polish. It seems very rough, is what I mean. It's not polished at all. It is very much a rough grit. This is what you're getting because this is all the budget could afford at the time. And looking at it from what I did now that I have the refresher, a lot of the things that I really liked about this movie does hit similarly to how it hit me in the beginning. The idea of um, a brotherhood that essentially works in tandem with humanity, and their whole point. It also goes to show, like, one of the things that I really liked about those scenes, uh, especially with the fast-paced supposed trying to detective work. They were trying to make a detective film out of this. It did not happen, which means that that's one of my worst scenes, was that they really pushed to have this as a detective story of like, where will he come up next? But it gives away where he's coming up next in like the next scene. And I think a lot of it's a block issue and not enough time to smooth out and refine. Um, so most of it comes down to that. I do agree with Krisha that anything dealing with the insane brother, it really needed to show him first sane to see the good that he's done, to work together, show that bond, as it was said. My favorite scenes in that is
We'll
the
get to favorite scenes.
hmm?
We'll get to favorate scenes. That's
Oh well,
coming
you
next.
told they were saying all the good
Okay,
and
Yeah.
like
go for it.
yeah, okay. I can wait. I
No,
can
go.
wait.
No, go for it.
Okay, so my favorite scene, I guess, happens to be the progression of um, the partner of the cop, the detective, main character detective. Can't remember her name. And his progression to learning slowly and slowly that his paranoia is unfounded with this one, while quite literally he has a ton of issues regarding others, that this one's a bit on the outlier slash the exception. I think the idea behind it is like, yeah, they have problems, but they see that they're fighting for the same thing and the same cause, um,
Pull your mic a
to
little
protect the
closer.
people, to protect a little better.
There
I
you go.
think that was one of the things that they were working at, was something that I think depicted probably the most growth out of the characters, and thus became one of my favorite, or one of my more favorite scenes.
I don't have a hated scene for this. I think they were all integral to the movie itself. I think they all told a different part of the movie. They all had meaning with this. That being said, I do think this would do better as a miniseries. Take time, delve into things episode by episode, build up. This was not supposed to be a movie. 100%. I also agree with Ocean very much. This was not a detective movie. That was forced. Very much. This could have been a gritty steampunk horror movie just fine. They could have done so much more if they had taken that angle. I think they didn't know what their genre was. I think they didn't know what their subject matter was. And with a couple of different tweaks, it could have gone so much better. As for favorite scenes, one specific one that stands out to me is the woman in the dungeon. The one with the tap in her arm. I know, Marley, you said you don't like this, but the emotion that was in that scene. She's begging for help. I'm sick. Please help me. Why won't you help me? They walk in, turn on the tap, fill up their goblet, turn off the tap, and walk away, and she's still begging for help. The absolute desperation in that scene got me. Also, when they were chasing the brother through, he was in like the air ducts of the building. They were chasing him through the building after the cop got bit and was harmed. And sorry, the brother walks in. He's like, he has a gun pulled on him, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, stay the fuck away from her. And he's like, do you want me to help her? Like, do you want me to save her? And then they're like, oh. So he saves her and then turns around and tells them to shut up. And we immediately jump to his hearing where he can hear his brother crawling through the vents. They track the brother down. The brother finds out, notices that they're coming, goes to run for the window. Immediately a gun's pulled, a shot's fired with this like little injectable dart thing. Doesn't even make it to the window and plows fucking straight into the wall. Like head first. Just takes out that entire wall. I cackled. Like absolutely cackled at that. For me, it's not, again, it's not like specific scenes. Like I do have a couple of scenes that I enjoyed very much. The emotion that was poured into this, the passion that was poured into this. But it will always come back down to, with this movie, the aesthetics for me. This is an aesthetics movie. 100%. This is a flashy piece. Look, we made something. Isn't this the grime and the grit that you wanted? It's dark. I'm sorry, they got the steampunk aesthetics right. Like that's what steampunk's supposed to be.
That, and also you got to look at the time that it was pumped out as well.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was 2009 that it came out.
Something like that.
During that time, there was a ton of the Gothic movement going on throughout there. We know how underground a lot of this is, and only recently, 2009. That's like almost what 16 years ago,
ish.
That it started making to the movies. I mean, granted, it's come out in other things, but I mean, this one was like, okay, so we've got this, and this is how it looks, and they got the aesthetic right, they got the vibe right, but they didn't.
The storytelling needs work.
On the story,
yeah, the storytelling needs work. Absolutely, 100%. Well, with that, let's move on to rating. You know how this goes? Scale of 1 to 5. How do you think it held up? Would you recommend it? Do you think it worked? We're going to start with Marley.
Okay, so I can't give it a high rating.
You're good. This is your time to let us know how you felt about this movie. This is your interpretation. There's nothing wrong with that.
I'm giving it a 2 because even while watching it, I couldn't keep up with it. And it kind of flip-flopped a bit more than I was okay with. I really tried. I tried so hard, but it just wasn't happening. And yeah, And then I tried to tell someone about it, and I'm pretty sure I said everything backwards. And I felt kind of bad.
I
Because
love that.
usually you guys know how I describe things, and
Hmm.
that couldn't even Marley-ize this movie. Okay. I couldn't. And I felt bad because I wanted to like it. And there were things that I did like, but then I just felt like I was missing things the whole way through. So, would I recommend it? To some people? There are some people that I would say you should watch this, and not because they're my arch nemesis or because I want to give them an aneurysm. Because those are options for recommending movies as well. Recommending movies as revenge is one of the options we need to put in here. Just saying. Um, Overall, yeah, it's definitely a two for me. I'm sorry. I tried.
Krisha.
Okay, so this movie ticks a box of this is like a guilty pleasure of mine, is like a dark, brooding vampire character who takes interest, who is very much oh, who is very much like stoic and very much honor coded, falls in love and is just like, you are mine. I am protecting you. And it's just like all of that like decorum and dedication he had to like whatever was there is now this muse. And it is a guilty pleasure of mine. And literally watching this movie, I was like, this editing is so bad, but I love this. I loved it. I straight up was like, I'm gonna be watching this movie again. Just straight up, just like literally, it was like just, and also the cop lady was a badass. I loved her. I loved her so much. She was so smart and so badass. So I'm going to give this movie a 3.5, but hardcore will recommend.
That is absolutely valid and fair. Ocean.
Oof.
I know you were
Not
excited about
recommend.
this movie. You said this movie was
I
like
know.
one of your
One of my
favorites.
favorites. Yeah.
Honest, what would you give it?
Honestly, it's a 3.5. But let me explain. There's a caveat to the reason why I give it such a higher rating than I would anything else. One thing, this movie is not for your casual watcher. This movie delves into things that you have to think on and sort of fill in the gaps. That which is missing, if you can't fill in the gaps, you're not paying enough of attention. I can't say that you could be paying attention, and it lost me the first few times that I've seen this movie, but it tries to carry over the nuance into the next scene. It tries to fill that. The problem is that it needs more dialogue in order to get all that. One of the things that I would say is it's definitely not a movie for someone who's you know, wanting a good time or seeming that they like mainstream media. This is not an action film either. So I put it, if you are in it for the aesthetics of Gothism, the steampunk aspect, the underground, this movie's for you. But you're going to have a lot of trouble essentially keeping track of where the story is because a lot of it is not narrated in dialogue and in carryover of the actual overarching story.
Fair. I spent time today thinking about, well, while I was doing other projects, thinking about what I was going to give this movie. I want to like this movie so bad. I want to give it a high rating so bad. But I can't. As much as I go for the aesthetics, as much as I go for the feel and the vibes, that in itself does not make necessarily a good movie. The plot has to have substance. Sometimes you've got to take your audience and you've got to handhold them, for lack of better words. You've got to lead them from one thing to another. And then you build off of that. For this movie, the saving grace was the aesthetics, which is why I'm giving it a 2.5. Which is odd that I'm not, the harshest rater here tonight. That usually falls in my territory. Sometimes I'm a little more generous, sometimes I'm not, but I'm going to give it a 2.5. Redo this. Redo this as a series. Flesh out the story. Show us the backstory. Set things up properly. Give us a proper story with this. Keep the vibes exactly as they are. Do not change a thing about the vibes, about the aesthetic, about the city that you've built. But work on that story. You do that, I'll come back and I'll change my rating depending on how well you've done, honestly. Like, I have no issues revisiting if you make it a series. Would I recommend it? Yeah, there's people out there I would definitely recommend this movie to. Hardcore. People who, like me, go for the aesthetics. Go for the... what's the word I'm looking for?
The platypus.
No. People who go for the more visual, I guess.
Visual visceral.
Yeah, the visual visceral. If you go for that, I'd hands down recommend this movie. If you're in it for the story, don't fucking bother.
Yeah. Would we say that this movie is all edge, no point?
I mean, yeah, that's a fair assessment.
I can deal with that. It's an edgelord movie, everybody, and it really kind of is. I mean, it does have an antagonist, but the antagonist has no growth. The protagonist has really no growth. The only one that does is actually the side characters, which is kind of odd.
That being said, no growth in the movie. Do not confuse that for not well developed. These characters were decently developed. I think they had decent story behind them. From what I saw, they had depth to them. I'm sorry, but the way they played that lack of emotion in the brothers was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely no emotion whatsoever. No anger, no happiness. Don't shed tear. Well, shed a tear once, but devoid of emotion otherwise. So, I guess on that note, does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Loaf is asleep.
I meant
What is?
Loaf. I meant about the movie.
Well,
No?
go ahead, Catherine. Were you gonna say something? I saw you open. Nope. Okay, I got one last.
We're can't wait for the bracket next week.
So you guys want to do the bracket next week?
Yeah, we can do that. The last thing I'm gonna say about this movie: stellar lineup for the time. Granted, definitely could have done a lot better with the editing. The aesthetics where it's at. It needs, I wouldn't say deeper substance on it. I would say they need to fine tune details and be more patient with the story, the backstory. If you're gonna do it right, and actually give investment into why they're the way they are.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, on that note, guys, this has been Masquerade Breach, Season 2, Episode 9. I'm Blazewing.
I'm Catherine Cosplays, otherwise known as Krisha.
Marley.
Your phone picked you up this time.
Hey, yay! And I'm Oceanus Veritas, also known as Cam.
And we'll see you next week for our bracket, and then we'll see you in Season 3. Don't tell the Camarilla that this is our last episode of this season. They'll never let us rest in peace. For those of you on the purple place, stick around. Well, sorry, for those of you on the purple place, I'll see you guys later. I'm just going to let you go into the ether today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining. We love your faces.